Hello, and welcome to Wine Grants, unscripted chat about the unfunded, the official podcast of the Unfunded List. I'm Dave Moss of the Moss Family Foundation, and with me this time is a young man named Sacha Litman. Say hello, Sacha.
Hello.
Welcome to the booth. Thank you for being here. Sacha has provided, as is our form, his bio for me to read out loud, which I will now do. Sacha Litman is the managing director of Measuring Success, a firm whose mission is to help foundations and grantees harness the power of data to move the needle on impact. Sacha is also president of the Fund for Big Data and Philanthropy, which educates funders on big data and catalyzes data technology projects in the sector. Sacha holds his MBA with highest distinction from Kellogg at Northwestern and an MPA from Harvard's Kennedy School, and a BS in Applied Mathematics, which he received summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from Yale University. I've heard of all of those schools.
Good.
He is a recipient of a graduate educational fellowships from the Wexner Foundation and DeRote Foundation. Sacha has worked for McKinsey & Company and Credit Suisse and was director of strategy and performance measurement for a large international nonprofit organization. He teaches data analytics courses for Georgetown University, Kellogg School of Management, and Brandeis University. Welcome here to the booth, Sacha. Very impressive work. You're all up in philanthropy. Lots of foundation names and names of philanthropists in your bio there. Very interesting. You teach at Brandeis.
I do. Just completed a course. They got a grant from a foundation to fund a bunch of a cohort of fellows who are Russian-speaking, who work in the philanthropic sector, and basically teaching them an overview of how to use data to advance their purposes and goals.
That's very interesting. I get confused here. He's my great-grand uncle. Was a guy named Edward Rose, and at Brandeis is the Rose Art Museum, named after him.
Very nice.
So that's how in fact the Moss Family Foundation is the modern-day iteration of his charitable work. He died way before I was ever born. I don't know anything about him, but nice guy, liked art, and that's a great museum there, beautiful campus.
Terrific.
Cool stuff you do. I just this morning saw an interesting Facebook post. You mentioned big data in your bio there, and someone compared big data to teenage sex. Everybody's talking about it and claiming that they're doing it, so everybody just is saying that they're doing it, but no one actually really understands it. No one's really doing it. Is that accurate?
I'd say it's pretty accurate. I think for listeners here, I think we should probably frame the thinking not as big data, but small data growing towards big data. I think, big data is really sort of a catch-all phrase for this idea of how do we amalgamate the data that is all around us and use it to gain insights about patterns and trends that allow us to be more effective in what we do. The truth is that the underlying techniques that undergird data, that undergird big data, is no different than what we all learned in school when we studied math, or whatever engineering courses people may have taken, or economics courses in college. It's the same underlying statistical and analytical principles. The major difference, and the reason it's so hot right now, is because the cost to store data are so much cheaper, so you can aggregate data much more economically and efficiently than you could before, and at a much cheaper cost. Just think about your phone and or Amazon AWS and all of its very cheap storage costs, and also the fact that there are tools out there now that allow the analysis of data in a more automated fashion than historically possible. The methodologies haven't changed, but the tools to enable it have sort of brought it to the masses, which is one of the reasons why it's become so pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Can you give me a real-life example of a nonprofit using big data in order to have a greater effect, to enhance their mission?
Sure. So one of the organizations that we're working with right now is it's an arm of it's several foundations that are collaborating to try to, and again, whether you agree with the mission or not, to try to improve marital rates and reduce divorce rates, things that generally people would agree with. There are a lot of good positive outcomes that have been shown by longitudinal studies about, being...
The family unit is a solid economic unit.
Exactly.
Hard to argue with that.
Family unit, developmental ability, developmental growth for the kids, all that kind of stuff.
Divorce seems to be bad.
Exactly.
Right, obviously, sometimes necessary, but
exactly. So the question
lowering
is,
the rate seems like a laudable goal. Sure.
exactly. So how do you get there? So what we've been doing is we've been working with this organization. We're working with them, bought up about 7 million records of individuals in 3 cities they were targeting, and we were able to basically profile based on publicly available data people's essentially likely marital category, either single or married or engaged, because remember, marriage records are in many cases public and can be aggregated, whether they're divorced or not, again, public information if it's been filed. Likely just information that just likely categorized based on purchase patterns, etc., the likely status of their relationship. Then we running a mass media campaign that they're starting now. The idea is essentially in these markets to drive people to websites where they are going to capture additional information that people are going to self-enter, questions about their relationships. Are you in a good relationship? Are you trying to get out of a relationship, etc.? And based on that information and then on the purchased information that we have, aggregating it together to then send targeted messages to each of the individuals based on what's most likely to keep them either in a stronger relationship or to refer them to intervention strategies, whether run by their local church or synagogue or other nonprofit organization, social service organization, to help them intervene appropriately. So that's one example of taking data sets, purchase data sets, information that people self-volunteer through the internet, and other data to basically organizational nonprofit data, and stitching it together in order to be able to look at the patterns of engagement and use that to try to retain people and ultimately give them information that is relevant to them. As another example, we did a project, this is about 1.5 years ago in Texas, where we basically took the data from a public school system, the Dallas Independent School District, and linked it with data from about 25 after-school organizations. So if you're an after-school nonprofit organization, as some of the listeners here may be, and you're working with at-risk youth, then one of the big questions you have is, what impact did our program have? So let's say you're an anti-bullying organization. Well, you might contend that your program makes a big difference in kids feeling not bullied, or if they are bullies, diminishing that behavior and leading to greater academic results, lower dropout rates, better behavior, better attendance in the school. The problem is that you probably have no idea if you're making a difference or not, because you don't have access to the school records of those kids' progress, because a lot of these kids come to your program for a semester and then they're gone. And you don't know what happened to them afterwards. But by linking the data sets, we're actually able to see what happened. Consequently, let's say your nonprofit anti-bullying organization is serving 300 kids this year, and we also might find out that, for 150 kids who are Latino girls, it's having a huge impact over time, but for the boys, it's actually not making a difference at all. So that also provides useful feedback to see what's working and what's not working. But again, you can only do that if you stitch the data sets. Similarly, this is similar if you watch Dallas Buyers Club, that movie a few years ago when the AIDS crisis erupted and the scientists were trying to figure out what cocktail of drugs would work, and they couldn't figure out the right cocktail. It took them about 5 or 10 years before they finally figured out how to combine AZT and all the other compounds in order at the right dosage level in order to help to address AIDS appropriately. Similarly, in the nonprofit sector, if you're that anti-bullying organization, it could be that they need 6 months of exposure to anti-bullying plus another math enrichment program in order to make a difference. And your program by itself doesn't work, but in combination with a few others, it does work, or at a certain dosage level it works. And that you can only really find out by aggregating up individual data sets to be able to gain insights.
Very interesting. A couple things to respond to in there. One, you mentioned, I heard purchased data sets, and also a couple other things that definitely sort of cost money. I've heard this from some of the small nonprofits I've supported in the past, and in fact some of the folks who come to us at the Unfunded List. And I'll even say it's a problem. It's not that big of a problem, but an issue I'm facing currently at the Unfunded List itself is that this stuff it costs resources to work with data like this. Right? For instance, I have some general numbers on how many people clicked through onto the list, how many people are going to listen to this podcast, right? But if I don't have the funds to do,
patterns for
I'm not doing full level data and stuff, and I think that's probably true for most smaller nonprofits.
Right.
So how is to add, the foundations are, and I think rightfully so, increasingly looking at wanting these metrics. So making it even harder for these small nonprofits who already had a difficult time approaching a foundation to get in there now, because now the foundation has an extra way to keep them out. We need metrics. You don't have metrics. Right? I need money to have metrics. Right. That is one of the conversations I'm sure a lot of our folks are having. What would you like? What is if you any suggestions for low cost ways to access data? Some of this stuff's public,
Right. Well, look, the actual direct costs of all the data collection approaches I've just alluded to are actually fairly cheap. So, for instance, there are about 4 data sources one can gather. There's social media data, which, quite frankly, if you're very adept at Twitter or you're very adept at pulling
Facebook
things
Pages gives you a lot of information.
Yeah, although Facebook changes its rules pretty regularly, they try to make it pretty difficult
Seriously.
for organizations to pull data off of there. That's intentional. They want you to pay them.
Is it?
They want you to pay them so that they can gain advertising revenues. But anyway, be that as it may, there's social media data that you can scrape if you know what you're doing. That's actually pretty much basically without cost, although sometimes there's a marginal cost associated with it. The data purchase I alluded to is actually not very expensive. If you know what fields you're looking to, most of the data aggregating organizations out there, it's only costs about 25 cents a record. So if you're talking about 1,000 people, then you can do it for a fairly reasonable amount of money. You can play out the math of $250 and determine if it's worth it for you or not. But for a fairly reasonable amount of money, you can pull that information. The third source of data is survey data. There's SurveyMonkey and plenty of other tools out there that are essentially low cost or no cost. Again, very limited cost. And then the fourth data source is actually being disciplined about tracking your own data. So, when people reach out to the Unfunded List, do you put that into your database, right? Do you have information from your own interactions with people?
Do I have a database?
Right, you have a database, right? Again, those databases are cheap to no cost. I mean, you can use Excel for all you want. You can use online,
if you're a
Google.
501c3, Salesforce Foundation will give you licenses for free.
Salesforce gives the first 10 licenses for free. If you're bigger than that, it doesn't work so well.
10 licenses is a lot.
Right, exactly.
For most small nonprofits, that's more than they need.
Exactly. You can use Excel. You can use Google Sheets, whatever it is. You don't need a sophisticated. You just need a discipline to do it.
The Google App Suite has been a real game changer for me as a nonprofit professional. When I first started working, we had a shared drive that was located somewhere in New Jersey.
Sure.
And, I had to be at work to access anything, even to check I remember I had to be at work to check my email.
Yeah.
That is funny. That is really funny to think about. It wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. But I think the essential point is while the direct costs, to go back to my point, are really inexpensive, what's costly is the skill sets necessary to be able to amalgamate the data and make sense of it. You've got to figure out first of all, you have to determine what is success, right? So the first question I always tell an organization to think about is, how do you define success? If you can define success, then you'll know what data to capture. Second, then you can go through the effort of the data collection, but then you have to worry about the analytics and the interpretation and the sharing back of the data. That's why, if a foundation is thinking about how to be helpful to a nonprofit, and they're a capacity-oriented foundation, it's really important to think about metrics not from a perspective of evaluation, because I think the word evaluation has set back the nonprofit sector by 10 years regarding data. Because what it essentially is that if you're a foundation professional, you think, ask the nonprofits for the data. And especially if you're a small nonprofit, and by the way, big nonprofits do this too, you think of that as, great, it's a marketing pitch. So let me make up some data, let me basically pitch it to the funder, I'll give them whatever they want, and basically make it seem like it's valid data, and I'll try to put one over on the funder and essentially convince them that this program has impact or that they're going to get the data that they want.
Hard to blame them. They need funds.
Hard to blame them.
They're jumping through the hoops that they think they need to jump through. Yeah.
Totally, they are playing to the incentives presented to them, which is why I tell funders, you've got to change your mindset. It's not about evaluation data for you and your benefit. It's about how do we build the capacity of your grantees to have the ability to know how to use data and work with data so that they can actually improve the quality of the work that they do. That is, it's about a flashlight as opposed to a hammer. Right now, evaluation is a hammer. Give me the data or else. If you don't perform well, I cut your grant. As opposed to a flashlight. Hey, I'm going to give you some funds to help you build the capacity to learn how to leverage and aggregate your own data and learn from it and basically decide for yourself how to keep improving upon your performance. So use it as an exploratory flashlight or a tool to be able to figure out what you're doing well and what you're not doing well, so that when you come back to me at the end of the grant, you've already made adjustments along the way to get smarter about what you're doing. Because what you really want to see as a funder is that the nonprofit has used the data to make adjustments to the program, and in reaction to the information that they're getting back, so that they show that they're really a continuous feedback-driven and continuously improving organization. Absolutely. And that's the switch. And unfortunately, most funders still think in the evaluation mindset, but we really need to change that.
As you were talking about the foundation that wants to lower divorce rates,
right?
I was sort of like, part of me was daydreaming off a little bit about, like, I just started to think about, because I like to think about how how nonprofit might stretch their mission to convince, we're lowering divorce rates because we're I was actually a friend of mine, she runs an urban garden program, and she actually told me one time that it's good for families, it keeps families together. She said it keeps families together at one point in the meeting, and I remember being like, that's a weird point to make. And I wonder if she had in fact met with your foundation or thought that was a priority for me, right? But and I've done that myself. You go to the foundation's website, you see what their priorities are, you phrase your program in a way that convinces them it meets their metrics, and you're doing that because you need money, and that's a really weird conversation that's happening a lot between a lot of foundations and their fundees, and I like the way that you phrased it there. Another question I have for you: do you think there's impact out there that nonprofits or social change organizations can have that is not quantifiable, or do you think that there is a way to count all impact?
Great question. This question gets asked a lot. Put
I'm
it
glad,
this way:
glad to hear that.
I can say, look, and I've been doing this for about 10 years now, and I can say that I have yet to come across a definition or goal that couldn't be measured. The big challenge is you have to be really creative sometimes about how you actually capture the data. And oftentimes you can't necessarily capture the long-term outcome. It's not feasible, and it's not something you can take credit for. So you have to sort of pick a proxy, for instance, and you have to be creative about it. For instance, if your goal is that, now let's pretend you're that after-school anti-bullying organization, is to prevent kids from dropping out of school. But you're serving kids who are between kindergarten, say 3rd grade and 6th grade, and most dropout occurs between 9th grade and 12th grade. There is no way in heck that you're going to be able to take credit for what happens to the kids solely by yourself 3 to 6 years later. It's just not. It's not a time frame that's realistic. Quite frankly, by then you'll probably not even be in the position anymore. So
they're doing it though.
Right. So part of the
there
challenge.
There are definitely 6 through 9 programs out there claiming credit for their graduation rates.
No question. But it's really important to measure that which you can actually take credit for, and often take proxies that are reasonably associated with the longer term outcomes. I think we all get caught up with the long, far-term outcomes that we can see. Like, for example, in the Jewish community, there's a great obsession with that they'll come out with a strong Jewish identity and marrying Jewish down the road. Well, if you're working with kids who are teenagers, that outcome is 10 to 15 to 20 years away. So you're going to tell me that you're going to take responsibility for that? That's really putting a lot of onus on an organization. It's unrealistic. You've got to pick proxies that are more aligned with the timeline of the professionals who are responsible for actually driving the results, in order to enable them to actually feel that they're actually accomplishing something, and for the foundation professionals to see some reasonable results. Because if you have a lag of 10 years, you're just never, that's not a reasonable period of time to actually see change.
And I bet there's a Jewish day camp out there somewhere claiming credit because all their alumni are marrying Jewish.
Absolutely. And
while
while
they're probably all from Bethesda or something.
Yeah, and they've done plenty of longitudinal studies to show, having this intervention earlier in your life does tend to be associated with a certain outcome far later.
I believe they've told me birthright makes you more likely to marry a Jew.
Right, but that doesn't.
Sure I've been told that by them.
That is absolutely. Birthright's a great example. It's absolutely true that they've done studies that suggest that there's an association between attending birthright and marrying Jewish. 10 years later.
Somewhat obviously.
The problem is that that's a great generalizable study, but it doesn't tell you if you're a funder and you're funding a specific birthright bus or birthright city, it doesn't tell you if that program is being implemented particularly effectively. What you really want to know is, did the funds that I actually deployed, because remember, there's a lot of variability in quality. Think about anywhere out in the world. Think about any, McDonald's chain. There are some McDonald's that run really well and some that run really poorly. What you want to know is...
one of the poorer ones is just up the street.
It sure is. But what you want to know is the program that you're funding actually doing, are they actually doing well or not? Yes, empirically, if run perfectly, Birthright makes a difference. But did your investment actually make a difference here?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've talked about when we discuss this topic here in the booth, one of the things I like to bring up is Bat Kid. Do you remember Bat Kid? It was a Make-A-Wish.
Bat Kid or Bad Kid?
Bat Kid.
Bat,
so a kid,
B-A-T.
I assume he's probably passed by now because this was a few years ago. But he was a Make-A-Wish grantee recipient, terminal cancer patient, very young boy, 4 or 5 years old. Huge Batman fan. And the city of, you really don't know about this? This was a huge deal. So they basically shut down the city of San Francisco for the day and let the kid pretend to be Batman.
Huh.
I think Christian Bale was even involved. Like it was a very, the police, everybody. Like he got to stop crime and everything. Wear the suit out in public and everything, right? And in the Nexus group, Sacha and I are both members of Nexus. I remember there was some discussion afterwards, and also with a lot of my friends, between your effective altruist crowd, right? Because it cost about $1.5 million to do that for this kid, right? And to me, I agree with this. It's very difficult to quantify the effect of that $1.5 million. I still think it was worth doing. Obviously, you can't do that. You shouldn't do it for every single 4-year-old who's dying for cancer, as much as we might like to make them all Batman. So at the time, I was working at a nonprofit, and I saw the video, and I was inspired. And I think I worked harder that day. And how could you possibly? And I think that there were a lot of people who saw it. The video got seen millions of times. So how would you count that impact, right? And what would you say to someone? And perhaps you agree with me that $1.5 million, because there's a hospital in Libya that if we had given that $1.5 million, we could be able to tell you how many lives we saved, right? We would have actually saved children's lives. This kid is going to die anyway. He's going to die a little bit happier. We did a nice thing, but we could have saved lives with that money. That's definitely a true point. So I'd love to hear you. Do you think the Bat Kid project was a good idea?
Do I think the Bat Kid project was?
Or how would you count the metrics on that?
Yeah. Well, I think it all comes down to the fundamental question I asked earlier, which is I hope that organization, I hope Make-A-Wish asked itself before it ran that program, what is success? And essentially your ROI, right, a calculation of return on investment, depends on what, the money spent is clear. But that's the denominator, fine. But what's the numerator here? What are we actually talking about in terms of impact? Were they, how much of that was for that kid? And how much of it was for, honestly, Make-A-Wish's desire to actually gain its own prominence for more people and attract more donors, right?
They raised more
money, right?
In the following week, they raised $5 million.
Right, so that's a financial outcome. How much of it is, in terms of buoying people's spirits? There are organizations who are pro-social, who are foundations, who fund pro-social activities and make people feel happier. If that was the goal, great. Now, if it was just for that one kid, would it have been worth $1.5 million? I'm not one to judge that, right? Nobody can judge whether it's worth spending that $1.5 million in this way versus saving the lives of some kids over in Libya in a hospital who are dying of shrapnel wounds. I don't think we can we're not God who can make that comparison. But I think it comes down to, because the nonprofit sector is unique in that there's no other sector that can define success in its own way. They can define their own mission. And that's a lot of power when you get to define your own mission. But in defining your own mission, you also have to determine, how do we determine success? What is success? So that program could have been a fabulous success if the goal was to raise a lot of additional money, or if the goal was to make, how many hits on YouTube and how many people they made happy. And I don't know if they followed up on that. Then it could be a tremendous success. It also could have been a tremendous failure if their goal instead was to basically was to buoy that kid's spirit so much that he wouldn't pass. Then maybe they wouldn't have succeeded. I mean, that's obviously a very callous sort of example, but again, that's the fun. That's the creative aspect of this work in the nonprofit sector, is that you are forced to always align the data against the vision of the organization. It's about alignment between vision and data. And the data is only as good or bad as it aligns with the vision. So you have to be clear on what's success first before you can say if it's good or bad.
Absolutely. Very well said. I think that is one of the first steps of being a philanthropist. One of my Yeah, I think it's a step that a lot of philanthropists skip. And for instance, in my own family, right, I am never going to make any gift to an art museum of any sort, right? But there's one with my great grandfather's name on it, right? And I think it's fine. I think that's fine. I got no problem with that, right? Because I'm not. He wanted his community didn't have a museum. He wanted there to be a museum. There's a really easy metric that's really easy to quantify.
Right. But let's be careful. Because the existence of a museum is, let's call that the intervention, right? You create a museum. But that isn't success. Success is what the museum creates, right, for society, right? Does it create a more intellectual, well-rounded society? Does it inspire people, right?
I would love to go back and ask him what his goal for the museum was.
Right. And look, a lot of philanthropists do fund activities because they are emotionally attached to the activity. They like art, therefore they fund a museum. Or they like, they know someone in their family who had cancer, so they fund a Make-A-Wish, cancer, intervention program for a kid who's dying of cancer.
Well, as I understand with Brandeis, a lot of the impetus with the original, he was one of the original capital donors there, was basically there were quotas at all the Ivy League schools for Jews. Sure. And they were like, what do we need them for?
Right. Right. So look, his goal might have been to make the Jewish university well-rounded in its acceptance among other universities, because any good university had to have a museum, and that may have
served. It's a fantastic museum.
Yeah, and that may have served its purpose very well. Whenever he made that grant 60, 70 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever it was.
70, I think.
Okay.
70 years, Jesus.
So that may have served its purpose well then, but that same activity, if you will, the museum being, if you will, an activity or program or product, has to change also with the times. The question, of course, that museum probably has to ask itself today is, because you don't have the quota system anymore, is, okay, what do we exist here to do?
Some of them probably still have it, they're just not talking about
it.
But
what do we exist? Yeah, University of Texas and others.
Yeah.
But what do we exist? What do we exist here to do? And that's the nice thing about nonprofit. They can change over time in terms of saying, like, what outcomes they're actually seeking. So look, you may start, the measures have to start with the outcomes. What outcomes are we trying to achieve? And then you can talk about how our program or our product actually influences, hopefully, those outcomes. And that's essentially what you have to measure. First, you have to say what's success at the outcome level, and then you can start to think about how do you leverage the museum in such a way as to affect those outcomes, right? If their goal was to influence, at-risk kids, then maybe what they do is they bus in, as we know a museum in Philadelphia recently the bus in kids from the inner city to gain exposure to art, because their goal is to basically expose those kids to essentially greater depth of culture. Great, and then you can measure that, right? But if their goal is still to ensure that Brandeis has a crowning achievement in terms of a museum that is unparalleled among universities, it's a very different goal, and you measure it very differently.
Fascinating. I could probably just keep listing off bad gifts, and you can listen to you tell me how one might measure them. But I think for now we will wrap things up. Thanks very much for coming by. Gonna have to have you come by some other time. Sacha's firm, Measuring Success, for anybody at nonprofits and foundations, are your clients, I assume. So if any of them out there listening, looking to measure their success a little bit better, check him out and his organization. As always, I want to thank our host, The Lookout DC, which is a beautiful co-working community for filmmakers and at least one philanthropist, located in the Adams Morgan neighborhood of Washington, D.C.